What if I told you that the version of yourself you've been loyal to is the very thing that's keeping you in chains? What if the only way out was to betray the person you've been trying so hard to protect? Carl Jung didn't say we lose ourselves through darkness. He said we lose ourselves by clinging to a light that isn't real. There's a betrayal coming, and it's the most necessary thing you'll ever do. The most terrifying, the most liberating. You've felt it stirring, haven't you? That quiet rebellion in your chest when you catch yourself performing again. That moment of exhaustion when you realize you've been loyal to a version of yourself that doesn't even exist anymore. There's a moment you never talk about out loud. Not with friends, not even in therapy. It's the moment when you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't feel hate, you don't feel pride. You just feel tired. Tired of being this person. Tired of keeping the same tone. Tired of saying the right things, pretending it still matters. You've built this version of yourself so carefully. The one who has it together. The one who shows up. The one who never lets anyone down. And now, you're exhausted by your own performance. That moment, when you feel emotionally drained by your own identity, is not a breakdown. It's a signal, a quiet rebellion inside you. And you need to listen. Carl Jung called this rebellion the beginning of individuation. But he warned us, before we become whole, we must first betray the false self we've built to survive. This isn't about becoming someone new. This is about remembering who you were before you learned to hide. Somewhere along the way, probably earlier than you remember, you created a version of yourself that made sense to the world. A version that worked. A version that got results. Maybe it was the achiever. The one who learned to turn pain into productivity, who discovered that success could numb almost anything, who made striving look effortless even when it was breaking you from the inside. You became the person who always had their next goal lined up, who measured worth in accomplishments, who never sat still long enough to feel the emptiness that achievement was meant to fill. Maybe it was the caretaker, the one who learned that love meant disappearing, that your worth was measured by how little space you took up, how much you could give without ever asking for anything in return. You became the person who anticipated everyone else's needs before they even knew they had them, who absorbed other people's emotions like a sponge, who learned to find identity in being indispensable. Or maybe it was the composed one, the person who never broke down, who absorbed everyone else's chaos and somehow still managed to smile. The one who became the emotional rock everyone leaned on, who learned that stability meant never showing cracks, never admitting uncertainty, never revealing the trembling that happened behind closed doors. At first, that version protected you. It helped you earn love, or at least approval. It made life feel safer, more predictable, more manageable. People knew what to expect from you. You knew how to be. There was comfort in the role, even when it felt tight around the edges. But slowly, so slowly you barely noticed it happening, that persona became a cage. Let me tell you about Sarah. She's 31, works in marketing for a tech startup, and everyone describes her as the reliable one. She's the friend who always has her life together while everyone else is falling apart. In college, while her roommates were having mental breakdowns during finals week, Sarah was making them care packages and keeping the apartment clean. At work, she's the one who stays late to finish projects that aren't even hers, who says yes to every additional responsibility, who makes everyone else's job easier by absorbing their stress. But Sarah has a secret. Every Sunday night, she sits in her car in her driveway for exactly 20 minutes before going inside. Not because she doesn't want to be home, not because she's avoiding her apartment or her life, but because she needs those 20 minutes to remember how to be Sarah, not the version of Sarah that everyone needs. In those 20 minutes, she lets her shoulders drop. She stops smiling. She lets herself feel tired without immediately trying to fix it. She allows herself to feel annoyed at her coworker who dumped another project on her desk Friday afternoon. She permits herself to feel lonely, even though she's surrounded by people who love and depend on her. She's been so loyal to being the reliable one that somewhere along the way, she forgot what she actually wanted. When friends ask her opinion on restaurants, she automatically thinks about what would make everyone else happy, not what sounds good to her. When someone asks what she wants to do on the weekend, she has a moment of genuine confusion. Not because she's indecisive, but because she's so out of practice with wanting things for herself. When she's alone, the silence feels foreign, uncomfortable, like she's forgotten how to just exist without a role to play, without someone to take care of, without a problem to solve or a crisis to manage. When was the last time you wanted something just for yourself? Not because it would help someone else or make you look good or solve a problem. Sarah's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions of us who learned early that being needed was safer than being known. That being useful was more reliable than being loved for who we actually are. Every compliment you received wasn't really about you. It was about the role you played. You're so together. You're so strong. I don't know what I'd do without you. These weren't celebrations of your soul. They were appreciation for your function. Every connection you made was filtered through the character, not your authentic self. People loved the version of you that made their lives easier, that made them feel better about themselves, that fit neatly into the space they needed filled. And the more you succeeded in being that person, the more you drifted away from your truth. You felt it in those quiet moments, in the silence after the applause, in the hollow feeling after you did everything right and somehow still felt empty, in the strange loneliness that came from being surrounded by people who loved a version of you that didn't feel real anymore. That feeling wasn't failure. It wasn't ingratitude. It wasn't proof that you were broken or selfish or demanding too much from life. It was your soul whispering, "This is not me anymore. This is not who I came here to be." But here's the paradox Jung understood so deeply, the one that most people never acknowledge. Even when you know it's a mask, you still cling to it. Even when you can feel how much it's costing you, you hold on tight. Because it gave you identity when you didn't know who you were. Because it gave you belonging when you felt like an outsider. Because it gave you a script when everything else felt uncertain and chaotic. You don't stay loyal to the mask because it feels good. You stay loyal because you're terrified of what happens without it. Who would you be if you weren't the strong one? The successful one? The one who never needs anything? The one who always has answers? What would you lose if you stopped being who everyone expects you to be? And what might you gain? Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." He understood that the mask isn't just protection from other people's judgment. It's protection from our own inner wilderness. The parts of ourselves that feel too much, want too much, dream too big, need too deeply. And so you perform, day after day, interaction after interaction. You show up as the version of yourself that works. The version that gets results. The version that keeps everyone else comfortable and keeps you safe from rejection. You perform when you're tired. You perform when you're hurting. You perform when you're angry or scared or confused. You perform until performing becomes so automatic you forget you're doing it. Until you wake up one day and feel completely alone inside your own skin. Until you realize you've become a stranger to yourself. Until the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes so wide it feels like standing on the edge of a canyon, looking across at the person you used to be before you learned to hide. This is the moment no one talks about. The sacred betrayal. The necessary death that comes before resurrection. It's not betrayal of your values. Not betrayal of your soul. Not betrayal of the people who love you. It's betrayal of the identity you no longer believe in, but still act out of obligation, out of habit, out of fear. It's when you look your mask in the eye, that carefully constructed version of yourself that has served you so well, that has earned you so much approval, that has kept you so safe, and you say, "I'm done protecting you. I'm done sacrificing my truth for your comfort." Let me tell you about Marcus. He's 34, a software engineer at a Fortune 500 company, and he built his entire identity around being the logical one. Growing up in a household where emotions were treated like dangerous weather systems. Unpredictable, destructive, something to be weathered rather than understood. He learned early that feelings were the enemy of peace. So he became the calm one, the rational one, the one who could look at any situation objectively, who could solve problems instead of creating them, who could be trusted to keep his head when everyone else was losing theirs. This served him incredibly well. He excelled in school while his classmates struggled with anxiety and social drama. He landed a prestigious job straight out of college while his friends were still figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives. He impressed everyone with his level-headed approach to life, his ability to make decisions based on data rather than emotion, his seeming immunity to the chaos that seemed to follow everyone else around. But at 34, something cracked. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice. Just a small fissure in the foundation he'd built his life on. He was in a quarterly review meeting, presenting a solution he'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. Charts, graphs, projected outcomes, risk assessments, everything laid out with the kind of methodical precision that had made his career. The presentation went perfectly. His manager was impressed. His colleagues nodded along appreciatively. And then someone, he can't even remember who, asked him a simple question. How do you feel about this project? Not what you think, but how do you feel about it? The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for his response. And Marcus realized something that stopped his heart. He had no idea. He'd spent weeks analyzing every aspect of this project, but he'd never once asked himself how he felt about it, whether it excited him, whether it aligned with anything he cared about, whether it meant anything to him beyond the paycheck and the performance review. He gave some generic answer about being pleased with the thoroughness of the analysis. People nodded and moved on, but Marcus stayed frozen in that moment of recognition. He'd been so busy being logical, so invested in being the person who had answers, that he'd completely lost touch with his inner world. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He cried, not because something bad happened, not because he was stressed or overwhelmed or facing a crisis. He cried because he missed himself. He cried for the version of himself that existed before he learned that feelings were the enemy. The part of him that used to get excited about things, that used to dream in colors the adult world doesn't have names for, that used to feel wonder and sadness and simple joy without immediately trying to analyze or fix or optimize those feelings. This is the moment of sacred betrayal. It's when you realize that the version of yourself you've been so loyal to, the one that earned you approval, that kept you safe, that made you successful, has become a prison. And the key to freedom requires you to turn your back on everything that used to define you. It's painful. It's destabilizing. It's terrifying. Because when you remove the mask, you lose the applause. You lose the image. You lose the predictability. You lose the sense of control that came from knowing exactly who you were supposed to be in every situation. But do you know what you gain? Breath, stillness, truth. The profound relief of no longer having to carry the weight of being perfect, being consistent, being who everyone needs you to be. You begin to notice parts of yourself you had exiled. The awkward one who says the wrong thing sometimes, but is endearingly genuine. The angry one who actually has very good reasons for being upset. The tender one who still longs to be held, to be seen, to be loved for more than just what you can do for others. The part of you that dreams and colors the adult world doesn't have names for. The part that gets irrationally excited about small things. The way light hits a building at sunset, the perfect word in a poem, the laugh of a stranger on the street. The part that feels everything so deeply it used to scare you, but now feels like coming home to yourself. And those parts? They're not your weakness. They're not the things you need to fix or manage or optimize. They are your power. Misplaced, misunderstood, waiting patiently for you to remember that they belong to you. Jung believed that freedom doesn't come from self-improvement, but from radical self-integration. From gathering up all the pieces of yourself you scattered in your attempts to be acceptable and welcoming them home. To be free, you must walk into what he called the shadow and sit beside the parts of yourself you used to silence. What Jung called the shadow isn't evil. It isn't the dark, terrible parts of yourself that need to be eliminated. The shadow is everything you decided was unacceptable about yourself. Your anger that had nowhere to go. Your neediness that was never met with tenderness. your wild, untamed dreams that seem too big for the life you were supposed to want. Your tendency to feel too much, want too much, be too much for a world that preferred you manageable. What parts of yourself did you learn to hide? What aspects of your personality were deemed too much, too inconvenient, too uncomfortable for others? But here's what happens when you stop running from these parts of yourself. They stop chasing you. They stop showing up as anxiety, as self-sabotage, as that constant feeling that something essential is missing from your life. They stop leaking out sideways in passive aggression, in perfectionism, in the exhaustion that comes from holding yourself together so tightly. When you turn toward your shadow with curiosity instead of judgment, when you acknowledge these exiled parts of yourself with compassion instead of criticism, something magical happens. They transform from enemies into allies. They stop trying to get your attention through dysfunction and start offering you their gifts. Your anger becomes discernment. Your sensitivity becomes wisdom. Your restlessness becomes creative energy. Your need for depth becomes the ability to connect authentically with others who are also tired of surface-level interactions. Only then do you realize the devastating truth. It was never the world rejecting you. It was you rejecting your whole self to be digestible, likable, acceptable to people who were never meant to understand the full spectrum of who you are. Marcus discovered this 6 months after his breaking point. He started therapy, not to fix himself, but to remember himself. He began paying attention to how things felt, not just how they looked on paper. He noticed that he actually hated his job, not because it was objectively bad, but because it required him to spend 8 hours a day pretending his inner world didn't exist. So he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He took a significant pay cut to work for a nonprofit focused on environmental conservation. Not because it made logical sense, but because when he talked about climate change, something in his chest lit up. Something that had been sleeping for decades finally woke up. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. His family was concerned about his financial future. But Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. The profound relief of no longer being at war with himself. When you betray the mask, you lose followers. People who were drawn to your performance, who needed you to be the stable one, the reliable one, the one who never had problems of your own. They drift away. And it hurts. Not because you don't understand it, but because you do. You understand that they love the version of you that made their lives easier, and now that version is gone. You lose momentum in the old game. The game where success was measured by how well you could maintain the image, how consistently you could perform the role, how effectively you could manage other people's perceptions of you. You lose the clarity that came from having a script, from knowing exactly what was expected of you in every situation. Your old self knew exactly what to say at networking events, in job interviews, on first dates. Your new self sometimes stumbles, sometimes admits they don't know, sometimes chooses honesty over harmony, even when it makes others uncomfortable. Your old self never disappointed anyone important. They were the safe choice, the predictable choice, the choice that made everyone else feel good about themselves. Your new self has boundaries, says no when they mean no, chooses their own well-being over other people's comfort, even when it costs them relationships they used to think they couldn't live without. But here's what you also lose: anxiety. The constant, low-level anxiety that comes from monitoring yourself, from checking and rechecking to make sure you're performing correctly, from the exhausting work of maintaining an image that never quite fits. You lose the pressure to be impressive, the weight of having to justify your existence through achievement, through usefulness, through being the solution to other people's problems. You lose the exhaustion of maintaining an image, the bone-deep tiredness that comes from being on stage all the time, from never being allowed to just exist without a role to play. You lose the shame of not living up to a version of yourself you never truly believed in. The guilt that came from knowing you were pretending, from feeling like a fraud even when you were succeeding, from the gap between who you appeared to be and who you actually were. Sarah, the reliable one we met earlier, discovered this 6 months after what she now calls her car breakdown, those 20-minute sitting sessions that turned into the beginning of her awakening. She did something that shocked everyone who knew her. She quit her job, not to pursue some grand passion or follow a dream, but simply because she realized she'd never actually chosen that career path. She'd just been good at it, and being good at something had somehow become the same as wanting to do it. Her friends were concerned. They'd built their own sense of stability around Sarah's stability. Her family was confused. They'd spent years proudly introducing her as our Sarah, the successful one. But Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: curiosity about her own life. She spent 3 months just being, not networking, not optimizing, not planning her next career move. Just waking up each day and asking herself what felt right. Not what looked impressive, not what made sense, not what other people thought she should do. What felt right? She started painting again, something she'd abandoned in college because it wasn't practical, because you couldn't build a stable career on art, because it seemed selfish to spend time on something that didn't help anyone else. But when she held a brush for the first time in over a decade, something in her chest cracked open. Not broke, opened. Like a door that had been locked for so long she'd forgotten it was even there. She began saying no to social events that drained her, yes to quiet evenings alone with her canvas and her thoughts. She discovered that she actually loved solitude, not because she was antisocial or depressed or avoiding her problems, but because that's where she felt most like herself, where she could exist without performing, without managing, without being anyone other than exactly who she was in that moment. The most surprising thing? The right people stayed. The relationships that mattered deepened. Because for the first time, they were connecting with Sarah, not the version of Sarah that made everyone else comfortable. Her best friend from college, who she'd been afraid to disappoint, actually thanked her. "I've been waiting for you to be real with me for years," she said. "I was starting to think I was the only one who felt like they were pretending to have it all figured out." Her sister, who had always seemed to have the perfect life, confessed that she'd been using Sarah as a measuring stick for her own success. "When you quit your job to paint," she said, "it gave me permission to admit that I hate being a lawyer. I've been miserable for 3 years, but I thought I had to keep going because you always seemed so sure about everything." You start waking up without a script. Instead of immediately reaching for your phone to check emails, to see what needs your attention, to begin the day's performance, you lie in bed for a few extra minutes and notice how you feel. Not how you should feel, not how you need to feel to get through the day, but how you actually feel. You begin speaking from a body, not from memory. Instead of automatically giving the response you think people want to hear, you pause. You check in with yourself. You say what's true, even when it's messier than the scripted version. And people notice. Not all will love it. Some will be uncomfortable with your newfound authenticity because it highlights their own performance, their own masks, their own distance from their truth. But the right ones will feel it, the weight of your presence, the relief of being with someone who's not trying to manage their perception of you. And more importantly, you will feel it, the profound relief of coming home to yourself, of no longer being at war with your own nature, of allowing yourself to be human in all the ways you used to think were unacceptable. There's a silence inside you now, not born of suppression, but of peace. The frantic internal chatter, the constant monitoring, the endless strategizing about how to present yourself, the exhausting calculation of what others need from you, begins to quiet. You stop chasing perfection because you realize you were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be whole. And wholeness includes contradiction, includes failure, includes feeling lost without making that wrong, includes being uncertain and messy and gloriously, imperfectly human. Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The darkness isn't your anger, your sadness, your fear, your need. The darkness is the refusal to acknowledge these parts of yourself, the pretending they don't exist, the exile of everything that makes you complete. When you bring these parts into the light, not to fix them, not to improve them, not to make them more palatable, but simply to recognize them as part of you, something magical happens. They stop controlling you from the shadows. They stop showing up as symptoms, as self-sabotage, as the vague sense that something essential is missing from your life. They become allies instead of enemies, teachers instead of tormentors, sources of wisdom instead of sources of shame. Marcus, our logical engineer, discovered something beautiful when he stopped running from his emotions. His work became more creative, more innovative, more meaningful. His relationships deepened in ways he never thought possible. He found himself laughing more, not despite his sensitivity, but because of it. He learned that logic and emotion weren't opposites. They weren't enemies fighting for control of his life. They were dance partners, each bringing something essential to the experience of being fully human. And when he stopped forcing them to compete, when he allowed them to work together, they began to complement each other in ways that made his whole life richer, more vibrant, more real. So here's the question that will define the rest of your life. Will you continue performing the version of yourself that pleases others but exhausts your soul? Or will you betray that version, not with cruelty, but with courage? Will you say, I no longer owe my life to a mask that kept me safe but kept me small? Because the day you betray the false self is the day you reclaim the real one. And the real you doesn't need permission, doesn't need to be admired, doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be free. This betrayal isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Every time you feel the pull to perform instead of being present. Every time you catch yourself saying what you think people want to hear instead of what's true. Every time you notice yourself dimming your light so others feel comfortable. In those moments, you have a choice. Return to the mask or breathe into your wholeness. Some days you'll choose the mask, and that's okay. This isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about noticing when you're acting and gently returning to authenticity. The beautiful thing about Jung's vision of individuation is that it's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you've always been underneath all the conditioning, all the adaptation, all the careful construction of a self that would be accepted. You already know what needs to die. That version of yourself that apologizes for taking up space. That voice that tells you your dreams are too big, your feelings too much, your authentic self too weird for this world. That part of you that learned to survive by being what others needed instead of who you are. The betrayal begins with a single moment of honesty. Maybe it's saying, I don't know, instead of pretending you have all the answers. Maybe it's admitting you're tired instead of pushing through with a smile. Maybe it's choosing the path that excites you instead of the one that looks impressive. Whatever it is, it starts with the recognition that you have been loyal to a version of yourself that no longer serves you. And loyalty to what diminishes you is not virtue. It's violence against your own soul. So if you're ready, not to become someone better, but to return as someone truer, then you already know what to do. It starts now, with the most honest act you'll ever commit. The betrayal that sets you free. The path to freedom isn't through becoming more. It's through the radical act of becoming whole. And you, exactly as you are beneath all the performance, are enough. You have always been enough.